Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We take the most ambitious questions you send us, we tear apart the source material you share, and we try to rebuild it all into something,
Right.
well, something genuinely actionable.
And this one was ambitious.
Oh, this was monumental.
Oh.
You, the listener, asked us to connect the ancient history of how we even define the concept of demons, and then track the moral implications of what happens when we start applying that concept to actual people, modern digital exile.
And then on top of all that, define what it means to live with integrity in a world that just seems obsessed with finding its next scapegoat.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is. But your sources give us a really strong thread to follow. What we're circling here is, I think, one of the oldest and maybe most destructive human technologies.
Our technology.
Yeah, technology. The ability to turn deep systemic complexity, social unrest, economic fear, even our own moral failures.
Yeah.
Into a single, external, easily understandable monster.
Right. So the tribe can feel clean.
So the tribe can feel justified and clean instantly.
Okay, so let's unpack that central mechanism.
Yeah.
You also brought in this fascinating internal framework you've been working on, this character you call Devon.
Right.
And you're asking, in this current environment, is redemption for someone like Devon even possible? Or is it that once the system labels you, you're exiled, flattened into this permanent non-human category?
Precisely. So our deep dive today has to thread 3 different but really interdependent concepts from all this material.
Okay.
First, the nature of mythic demons. Second, the power of moral symbols. And then finally, demonization as an active social psychological weapon.
And the goal?
The ultimate goal is to figure out what integrity means, not in theory, but in a world that, frankly, often profits from making sure exile is permanent. The whole discussion is built around this idea that we have to understand the historical function of the demon before we can even begin to fight the modern process of demonizing.
Let's start right there then.
At the
origin. Because when we hear the word demon today, especially in the West, our brains immediately jump to a cosmic binary.
Horns and fire.
Exactly. Horns, fire, the absolute opposite of good, pure evil. But the source material makes a really crucial point. This is a later simplification, a highly edited one even. It wasn't the default setting.
That nuance it's just vital, because the simplification demon equals pure evil is incredibly useful for, clear moral instruction or telling an epic story.
Sure, good versus evil.
Right. But it completely hides the complexity of ancient spiritual life. If you look at the original Greek daimon, for instance, it didn't primarily mean something evil or, the source of all wickedness.
It was something else entirely.
Something closer to a spirit, a supernatural being, maybe a lesser deity, or even a guiding force.
So less Satan and more like an unpredictable intermediary spirit.
Yeah.
Something that kind of mediated the relationship between us and the bigger divine forces.
Exactly. I mean, think about Socrates. He famously talked about his own inner guiding voice, his conscience, as his daimon.
And that wasn't an evil thing for him.
Not at all. It was a restraining, often protective presence. So that shows us right there that the ancient world had this vast, crowded spiritual ecosystem.
I like that phrase, crowded ecosystem.
It was. You had chaotic spirits, you had tricksters, protective entities, local gods, and sometimes harmful forces that were sorted into categories like ghosts or specific pests. It was a gradient.
So when did it get sorted into these clean buckets?
Well, it happened much later, particularly as certain monotheistic traditions developed and they were trying to create a clean, singular moral framework. That's when these vast ecosystems got sorted into the unambiguous buckets of good versus evil.
And that sorting process, while it simplifies faith,
it also provided the linguistic technology that we now use for social control.
That distinction changes everything. It reframes the original function of the demon, not as some philosophical necessity, but as a deeply practical survival tool. The sources point out this wasn't about abstract purity, it was about managing reality.
It was about legibility, pure and simple, especially if you look at ancient Near Eastern and Mesopotamian cultures. These demon categories, they didn't just exist to scare people, they functioned as explanations for tangible, real-world problems.
Problems without an obvious cause.
Exactly. Things that defied easy, visible causation. Think about sudden misfortune, A crop failing, a fever that kills a child overnight. The ancient mind didn't have germ theory or, modern supply chain analysis.
So if a healthy person gets sick,
The event required an agentic cause. It wasn't random. It was a demon, a specific malevolent spirit responsible for that specific harm.
and the power of naming that cause, even if you're wrong, is that it suggests you can do something about it.
Precisely. The purpose of identifying the specific force, the hand of the plague demon or the spirit of the night, was practical. It told you which ritual, which amulet, which banishment spell you needed to protect yourself or your community.
The goal was survival,
Yeah.
security, establishing control.
Not philosophical purity. Not yet.
So this creation of the demon archetype, even way back in myth, it performs these indispensable moral jobs for our psyche. Jobs we still need done today, even if we use secular names for them. You've distilled these down to 3 core functions.
Yeah, they're the 3 pillars that keep us reinventing this archetype no matter what era we live in. The first one is externalizing temptation.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, if I, a person who thinks of myself as good, suddenly feel an urge to do something profoundly harmful that creates a huge cognitive dissonance.
Doesn't fit my self-image.
Exactly. So the archetypal solution is to shift that responsibility. It wasn't me, my essential self. A demon tempted me. Now, of course, that can be used as pure evasion, right? Just avoiding accountability.
Sure, the devil made me do it.
But on a deeper psychological level, it can also be an honest symbol for those destructive impulses like addiction or rage or suicidal thoughts that truly feel alien inside of us. It's the psyche trying to deal with the painful fact that we have impulses we don't want to claim as our own.
That gives you a path to fighting the impulse, doesn't it? If it's an alien force, you can resist it. If it's who you are, it feels inevitable.
Exactly. It creates a space for the moral self to operate. Now, the second function is arguably the most important for society: protecting the moral boundary.
The moving fence line.
The demon acts as a constantly moving, symbolic fence line. By pointing at a figure or a group and saying that is the ultimate evil, the community instantly defines itself in opposition to that.
The self becomes clean by exclusion.
The demon, or the group we label as demonic, defines what the community is not by saying, there, right there, that's the edge of acceptable humanity. The community instantly establishes its orientation, its cohesion, and its own moral superiority.
And the third function, making evil legible. I think this is the most profound psychological insight here, because it speaks directly to our inability to process randomness and chaos.
It really does. It speaks to the human struggle to metabolize moral chaos raw. Real harm in the world is. It's usually boring. It's banal, it's incremental, it's the result of systemic failure or negligence or a series of rationalized cruelties.
Like a huge humanitarian crisis isn't one evil guy, it's 1,000 small bureaucratic failures.
Exactly. And if we had to process that raw chaos, the sheer systemic incompetence, it would be overwhelming. We'd be paralyzed. Because we are narrative creatures. We need a story.
A story with a villain.
Stories compress all that amorphous bureaucratic chaos into a single, recognizable face, often with horns. We need evil to look demonic, even when it doesn't, just so we feel like we understand the problem well enough to maybe, possibly, address it.
So humanity invents this concept, the legible demon, the moral fence line. And then comes the tragic next step, which seems to repeat throughout history, applying that mythological language directly to real people.
That's the moment. The exact moment we shift from a psychological myth to a brutal social tool.
And that tool is the scapegoat machine.
That's where we have to bring in René Girard's work. It's controversial, but his model of the scapegoat mechanism is just so insightful. Girard theorized that when tension rises inside a group from stress, scarcity, uncertainty, the group doesn't fight itself.
It finds an outlet.
It unconsciously unifies by selecting a single target.
It's group catharsis through external aggression, the ultimate diversion.
Exactly. The victim, the scapegoat, is then subjected to some form of ritual violence. Maybe physical persecution, or in modern terms, expulsion, banishment, cancellation. And critically, this expulsion produces a temporary, fragile peace, a collective sigh of relief.
And here's the insidious part.
This is the core self-justifying part of the machine. The target is retroactively reinterpreted as the cause of the original chaos. The removal of the scapegoat caused the relief, which is then taken as proof that the scapegoat was the problem all along.
It's a perfect circular logic. It keeps the ugly machine running forever.
And that reinterpretation provides this incredible twofold comfort. certainty and innocence. First, you get a simple cause in a confusing world. You don't have to admit the economy is complex. You can just say it was them.
And second, it restores the group's sense of innocence.
Right. By defining the problem as external and now removed, the group avoids looking at its own failures or hypocrisies. It's a cheap, immediate restoration of virtue.
Let's get into the weeds on the six-step loop you outlined, because this is the predictable recipe, the ugly machine, for turning anxiety into cruelty.
The cycle always starts with step one, which is external, a stress spike and a loss of control.
A real-world crisis.
A real-world crisis. War, economic shocks, a pandemic, rapid social change. The key ingredient is the feeling of powerlessness. When people feel powerless, they desperately crave a cause that feels agentic, something they can fight, not an invisible systemic force.
And that instability leads directly to step two, the internal reaction.
Which is the crisis of differences and identity panic. When our roles, our status, our future feels unstable, groups panic. They immediately crave clean, unambiguous boundaries. Us versus them.
Nuance becomes a threat.
Nuance is perceived as a direct threat to group survival. The overriding need is to know who belongs, and more urgently, who does not.
Which sets the stage for step three. A target becomes legible. How is that target picked?
It's rarely random. And it's rarely the truly powerful. It's usually an individual or a group already marked by some pre-existing stigma, a minority, an outsider, or the devastating traitor within.
Someone whose identity makes them easy to distinguish.
Their difference becomes the container for all the community's anxiety.
Then we hit the narrative phase, step four, narrative compression. This is where complexity goes to dust.
This is the propaganda stage. All the complex causes of the stress are collapsed into a simple, compelling villain story. A perfect example is the Nazi stab-in-the-back myth after World War I. It collapsed the trauma of military failure, economic depression, all of it, into one narrative. We didn't lose the war. We were betrayed by internal enemies, Jews, communists, socialists. It's an intellectual shortcut for collective grief.
And once that story is set, the language itself starts to change in step five.
Yeah.
Moral contagion and dehumanization. This is where cruelty starts to feel clean.
This is the mechanism of hygiene. It starts subtly, casual slurs, jokes, then it graduates to slogans, media framing. It's language that turns people into pests, disease, contamination, vermin, things that need to be removed for public health.
So inflicting harm feels like a moral duty, not aggression.
It unlocks mass violence by making it feel like a necessary act of hygiene.
And then the final psychological reward, step six. Expulsion or punishment produces relief.
When the scapegoat is banned, exiled, or punished, the group's tension instantly drops. The relief is palpable. And because the chaos subsides, that feeling of relief proves the target was the problem.
This is why good people participate. The system rewards them with the immediate addictive feeling of moral clarity and belonging.
It's exactly.
That six-step model it's chillingly durable. We have to spend some time on the historical examples you laid out because seeing the reruns is the whole point.
The pattern's durability is the lesson. Look at interwar Europe. The trauma was post-WWI instability. The crisis of differences led to the need for a national betrayal myth. That myth solidified around the most visible yet politically vulnerable minority, Jewish people.
Framed as the internal enemy.
The master scapegoat. And it didn't start with genocide. It started with rhetoric, boycotts, social shunning, the gradual dehumanization that made the future expulsion feel justified.
And we saw that fear of the enemy within play out even in democracies like the U.S. during World War II.
The WWII United States, right after Pearl Harbor. The stress spike of war, combined with a crisis of difference race, foreign origin, led to a demand for total security. The target became Japanese Americans.
Many of them citizens.
The justification was security, but the mechanism was classic group suspicion leading to mass incarceration in internment camps, proving that extreme punishment can happen swiftly, even with no evidence.
The Cold War provided a different kind of scarcity, a scarcity of trust, which led to a purification ritual.
McCarthyism. It's a perfect example of ideological scapegoating. The fear of communism led the group to crave purification. Loyalty tests, blacklists, public accusations, those were the acts of violence.
And the result was destroyed careers and social exile.
Which was then cited as proof that the threat was real, validating the initial panic.
Then, in the late 20th century, the pattern re-emerges around disease, which triggers those ancient purity anxieties.
The AIDS crisis is a painful example. HIV/AIDS was often framed not as a medical crisis, but as a moral one, a punishment for deviant groups, particularly gay men. The disgust and purity framing immediately activated the dehumanization process.
Which delayed empathy and hindered the public health response.
It allowed the general public to feel morally safe, believing the disease was confined to other people.
The idea of sustained dehumanization leading directly to violence is maybe most starkly shown in Rwanda.
Rwanda in 1994 is terrifying proof of step 5. The sustained propaganda, especially on the radio, relentlessly portrayed the Tutsi minority as cockroaches.
An existential threat.
This narrative compression removed the human face, making the mass violence that followed feel like a defensive act of pest control. It shows just how dangerous the language of disgust really is.
And then after 9/11, that profound terror shock repeated the pattern almost instantly.
Post 9/11, a very real terrorist threat was almost immediately expanded into blanket suspicion against entire categories of people, Muslims, Arabs. The terror shock led to a fundamental category error,
The guilt shifted from the individual perpetrators to an entire group.
creating the terror suspect class.
And finally, during the recent global pandemic, the machine just reran, fueled by fear and foreignness.
The COVID era is a textbook modern replay. Pandemic fear and medical uncertainty were channeled into a foreignness narrative, complete with contamination frameworks. We saw increased anti-Asian racism tied directly to this scapegoating rhetoric. History just keeps rerunning the same ugly machine.
So the dilemma we have to face now is critical. And it's about us, you, the listener. Why do empathetic, aware people who know tribalism is a trap, still use demonizing language? Even casually?
It's not a lack of morality, it's a failure of bandwidth and time. Our nervous systems are still wired for that immediate, high-reward hit of moral clarity. The first failure point is information overload, which leads to heuristic morality.
The shortcut problem, our brains are overwhelmed.
Exactly. When reality is saturated with facts and variables and news cycles, the brain defaults to mental shortcuts. Instead of analyzing complex systems, we default to simple categories.
Dispositional blame over systems blame.
They are bad people instead of there are bad incentives.
Okay.
Simple villains win out over nuance because they save cognitive energy and provide instant certainty.
This ties right back to our most primal reaction. Disgust.
It connects immediately to disgust and purity logic. Research shows that when people prioritize concepts like sanctity or purity, they are far more susceptible to visceral disgust reactions towards outgroups.
Which correlates with dehumanizing rhetoric.
Especially towards those who challenge traditional norms, sexual outgroups, but also people with different lifestyles, diets, health choices. This is why these topics become such volatile identity battlegrounds online. Purity logic turns disagreement into contamination.
And now, the digital environment turbocharges this. Outrage is no longer just an emotion, it's a currency.
Outrage is social currency. Condemnation is performative. When you loudly condemn an enemy, you're signaling two things. You're status signaling, I am one of the good, informed people.
And your coalition signaling.
I am one of you. And the online systems amplify this because outrage drives vastly higher engagement, rewarding the behavior immediately with validation and visibility.
So if the system rewards the behavior, we have to recognize that when we use hate language, we aren't just describing the world, we're reshaping ourselves.
That's a fundamental concept that's often ignored. Hate language shapes the speaker too. Studies show that engaging with contemptuous content is associated with shifts in the speaker's own emotional expression over time.
You're training yourself.
You're training yourself to be more aggressive and less empathetic. The language travels inward.
And finally, a lot of what looks like pure hatred, if you peel it back, is often just fear wearing a costume.
Insecurity fuels cruelty. If your identity feels threatened, the quickest defense is to restore a sense of control by demonizing the other. Cruelty can be a defensive mechanism. It's not always pure hatred. Often it's fear wearing the armor of moral certainty.
Which brings us to today, the internet. You call it the digital coliseum. Scapegoating didn't disappear, it just industrialized.
The scaling is the difference that matters. Historically, the scapegoat machine was constrained by friction.
Physical proximity, gatekeepers.
Right. Physical proximity, editors, community leaders, legal systems, time delays, and a high reputational risk to the accuser.
And the internet just removed all four of those frictions at once.
Exactly. Instant global reach, anonymity, virality, and algorithms designed to prioritize high arousal content. You create a system perfectly engineered to reward and accelerate our worst impulses.
And we see this behavioral training start early, with juvenile cyberbullying. It's scapegoating as a social training ground.
In the physical world, getting social standing requires charisma, maneuvering, risk. Online, social capital just requires timing. One bad tweet, one screenshot out of context.
And young brains are particularly susceptible to this.
They're hypersensitive to status and belonging, but they're still developing long-term consequence modeling. Scapegoating becomes this powerful, immediate form of group cohesion through cruelty. The lesson is, if we destroy them together, I am safe.
Which translates directly into adult cancel culture. And speaking of performance, celebrities provide the most visible ritual sacrifices.
Celebrities are the ideal scapegoats. They're hypervisible, symbolic, and their fame has already dehumanized them. They run through a predictable cycle. Elevation, scrutiny, flaw exposed, moral outrage, pile on, and then exile.
It's collective anxiety regulation, masks as justice.
Zero cost, maximum psychological reward. And this mechanism now plays out everywhere. Take sports. Online sports fandom is a high-speed lab for tribalism.
It's purely immediate, absolute blame.
A player makes one mistake and the reaction spirals into a torrent of abuse. The platforms reward instant blame and extreme language because it drives engagement. Gods when they win, demons when they fail.
And then there's politics, which is now a permanent 247 moral war.
Right. It used to have cycles. Now it's constant identity conflict. Every group needs villains and traitors to maintain cohesion. The language moves from policy disagreement, I disagree with your tax plan, to moral ontology.
You are evil. You are a threat to democracy.
And once the opposition is a demon avatar, any cruelty feels justified. This is how democratic discourse rots.
Even in supposedly objective domains like medicine and health.
Online health discourse is a prime example. Fear and uncertainty lead people to desperately seek moral certainty. Health choices, vaccines, diets, masks become virtue signals.
And both sides demonize the other.
Flattening probabilistic science into a moral battlefield where purity logic rules.
And finally, the surprisingly violent space. Food and lifestyle.
The debates over veganism, organic foods, seed oils, they become violent moral spaces. It's not about metabolic diversity. It becomes a proxy for identity, superiority, and disgust. Your sources called it a religion without forgiveness.
A purity hierarchy where any failure is met with immediate condemnation.
Exactly.
So we've established the model in the psychology, but modern demonization it's stickier. You've identified 6 new traps in the contemporary digital ecosystem that make escape so hard today.
These 6 traps are the fundamental differences, and we walk into them thinking we're just participating normally. The first and most significant is algorithmic demonism.
Evil outsourced and automated by the machines.
That's it. The systems we use don't just amplify demonization, they're optimized to select for it. Algorithms maximize engagement and content that triggers fear, disgust, moral certainty, outrage. It travels farther and faster.
So users learn implicitly what kind of speech gets rewarded.
Demonizing language becomes an adaptive behavior. It's procedural, not emotional. You don't have to genuinely hate someone, you just have to frame your criticism in the maximal moral language that the algorithm rewards with visibility.
That is terrifying. You could be committed to resisting demonization but still participate just by trying to be heard.
The system compels it. The second trap is identity compression.
Flattening a complex human into a single trait.
A single hyper-visible marker, political affiliation, a lifestyle choice, a single bad quote. Online, identity becomes what you are before what you do. If you have a single bad take, the system declares, this is who you are.
The third trap is a major shift. Preemptive moralization. Demonization used to follow harm. Now it precedes it.
This is what we call counterfactual demonism. You are guilty of futures, I imagine. You punish people now not for what they did, but for what their ideology must inevitably lead to.
It feels righteous, but it destroys individual agency.
And it justifies cruelty before any wrongdoing has actually occurred.
The fourth trap is so subtle and ironic. Therapeutic language as a moral weapon.
Language developed for healing toxic, unsafe trauma response boundaries is repurposed as an unfalsifiable moral weapon to secure immediate victory and total expulsion.
If someone is labeled toxic,
There's no due process, no proportionality, no path back. Demonism wears the mask of care, using self-reported feelings to achieve the goal of exile.
the fifth trap, aesthetic demonism, is where morality is judged by vibe.
Exactly. By tone, style, perceived arrogance, even awkwardness. We judge morality by superficial factors. It's not rational ethics, it's a gut feeling, but the resulting condemnation is total. Social grace gets mistaken for moral virtue.
And the final, most devastating modern trap, irreversibility as punishment, the end of forgetting.
Historically, exile faded, memory decayed. Now digital records persist forever, screenshots fossilize, search results become a permanent metadata history. Redemption requires erasing the internet, which is impossible.
So the system manufactures identity foreclosure.
The exiled person stops trying to grow, accepts the label, and often embraces the villain role because the door to improvement is permanently blocked. We actively manufacture the monsters we claim to fear.
So if the system's designed to flatten us into these archetypes, we have to talk about redemption and integrity as acts of resistance. The sources highlight this core split between two ways of seeing moral failure.
This is the constant philosophical choice. On one side, you have the essentialist demon view, the idea that someone is born bad. Once a cheater, always a cheater. It's psychologically comforting because it shields us from the idea that we could do similar harm.
It offers instant certainty. And the alternative, the harder path.
The action-based demon frame, which says, what you did was wrong. Repair is required. It keeps accountability active without collapsing the whole person into a single permanent act. Societies drift to essentialism under stress because complexity is exhausting.
And permanent exile, the endpoint of essentialism, is described as a social disease.
It creates identity prisons. If you deny a person a path back, and the only role left is villain, they will predictably adopt it and produce more harm.
So if permanent exile is a social disease, what does the healthier standard look like? The sane engineering approach?
It's necessarily slow. And graduated, it moves through 4 phases. First, accountability, truth, and consequences. Second, repair-making amends. Third, reliability over time, a sustained pattern of changed behavior, not just a one-time apology.
And fourth?
Bounded reintegration, graduated trust, not instant absolution. It's slower and less thrilling than condemnation, but it's structurally healthier.
This brings us to your case study, Devon, the framework you created to test these ideas, the walking contradiction to scapegoating.
Devon's existence is meant to prove that profound harm can be done without the person becoming metaphysically evil. The philosophical cure here is the car versus driver metaphor. You can't confuse the vehicle, the actions, the harm with the driver, the whole complex inner person capable of change.
Demonization intentionally collapses the driver into the vehicle.
Right. And Devon's arc shows that redemption is discipline, not a PR campaign. It's quiet, disciplined, behavioral change over years, not a performance for public forgiveness.
Okay, let's get ruthlessly practical for the listener. You outlined the integrity protocol. What are the actionable steps to disrupt this machine in our own lives?
The protocol is about disrupting the cycle at the language level, every day. First, separate person from act and language. We have to train ourselves to say, that was a cruel action, not you are a monster.
Second, trade certainty for specificity.
Demonization thrives on fog and generalization. Integrity demands clarity. We have to use specific language. Here's the exact action. Here's what I can verify. Here's what I am assuming. Clarity is the enemy of the mob.
Third, replace punishment fantasies with repair questions.
Right. We have to consciously shift from how can we make them suffer to what would accountability look like? What would reduce future harm?
Fourth, watch for discussed morality hijacks.
Yeah.
This is where we spot the purity politics.
If the argument relies on words like gross, degenerate, impure, or contaminated, you're likely operating in purity politics, which is prime territory for dehumanization. It's a moral canary in the coal mine.
And finally, use time as a truth serum.
Real redemption is profoundly boring. It's consistent, quiet, changed behavior over months and years. Watch the timeline, not the apology performance.
This protocol seems so logical, but you also explored why it's so hard for people who understand this to actually do it.
It's a stacked psychological failure. The first is just exhaustion, moral fatigue. We're burned out from constant high-stakes moral judgment. When everything is urgent, sustained care collapses into reflex.
Then there's the scaled-up bystander effect, diffusion of responsibility.
My one comment doesn't matter. It's just one joke. But demonizing culture isn't built by single villains. It's built by the accumulation of a million shrugged permissions.
And that ties directly into emotional inertia.
Once you're feeling righteous, validated by the group, it takes massive energy to slow down or inject nuance. Most people don't fail morally because they decided to be evil. They fail kinetically by drifting with the mob.
And the most dangerous failure, the personal shield, is self-exemption, calling it venting or dark humor.
Using intent as a shield against impact. I didn't mean it to be destructive, but cultures don't run on intent. They run on repeated signals. What you normalize matters infinitely more than what you intended.
So if the system is massive and our impact feels tiny, what's the actual consequence of our vigilance?
You influence the local moral weather. You can't change the whole algorithm today, but your single comment, your refusal to repeat a narrative, your careful sentence, that sets the tone for your immediate culture. Culture spreads laterally. Every norm shift in history started as individual friction.
So the integrity protocol is not designed to be comfortable. We have to anticipate the pushback because adherence costs social status.
We have to. The first critique is a form of evasion, moral insulation. I already reject demonization. This isn't about me, it's about the extremists.
Defining the problem so narrowly that their own casual contempt or passive silence doesn't count.
They confuse absence of evil intent with absence of destructive effect. The reply has to be clear. Culture is shaped not by what extremists do, but by what ordinary people tolerate in the middle. The machine requires the quiet assent of the well-meaning.
The second, and most common, is defensive minimization. You're being too serious. It's just a joke.
Not that deep is code for, I don't want to examine the consequences of the emotional relief I just got. The reply is historical. Every culture that normalized cruelty said it wasn't serious until it was too late.
Then there's the effectiveness critique. This advice is boring and unrealistic. It doesn't create dramatic change.
It confuses spectacle with impact. The answer is direct. Integrity is boring. That's why it's reliable. It trades short-term moral adrenaline for long-term coherence. Revolutions burn fast. Norms shift slowly through quiet resistance.
The strongest objection is probably the fear that this lets bad people off the hook.
This equates harshness with accountability. They fear that without total demonization, real harm will go unchecked. We have to emphasize, accountability without demonization is fundamentally harder, not softer.
It requires evidence, due process, proportionality.
All of which outrage is designed to skip. Demonization is cheap accountability. It requires no heavy lifting.
And finally, we arrive at the uncomfortable truth about our own moral standing in all this.
We have to internalize that being on the right side is often circumstance, not virtue. The belief that our current morality is a permanent destination creates moral immunity. But often our moral standing is an accident of birth or timing or being socially situated where the target doesn't look like us.
And that recognition calls for vigilance, not immunity.
Vigilance against the drift. Most people fail morally because they simply drift. They mistake being loud for being effective. They outsource their conscience to their in-group. Devon's ethic is about refusing to let momentum decide who you become.
The goal isn't to feel good about yourself,
but to be able to live with yourself, even when restraint costs you status, when nuance makes you lonely, and when absolutely no one is keeping score.
We started this deep dive with ancient spirits and the need for a moral fence line, and we tracked that mechanism right into the digital coliseum where human complexity is being flattened by powerful algorithmic incentives. The choice before us it's profound. It's the choice between simplicity, the satisfying relief of the demon archetype, and the difficult, constant work of protecting human complexity.
At the end of the day, you're not judged by what you oppose or which tribe you affiliate with. You are ultimately judged by what you normalize. You're defined by the jokes you let slide, the contempt you repeat, the pile-on you join because silence felt risky. Integrity isn't a performance, it's a discipline of friction.
So act as if every word trains the person you're becoming.
Because it does. The question for you, the listener, isn't whether demonization is bad. The question you have to ask yourself every time is this: who are you when the algorithm hands you a torch? Did you make the world slightly less hostile to human complexity, or did you help flatten it? That is the final practical rule.